Hi. Greetings from Wisdom Lord Raphael. Before we start, please hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell icon and don't miss any content. This is the light novel of that time I got reincarnated as a slime. If you haven't watched previous video, I will leave the link on the description box, or you can click here. Let's start. This is Tensura Light Novel Volume 17. Tensura Light Novel. Volume 17. Fragments Across Space-Time. Chapter 3. The Turbulent Days. Calgurio. My name is Calgurio. I was the captain of the Armored Corps, the most powerful force in the Eastern Empire. I was just plain stupid at the time. I said I was doing this for Rudra, but all I had cared about was my own personal glory. Now I understand what a career is worth. That's right, 40 years ago, a commander-in-chief of a corps from a lowly nobleman's family, that's a big promotion. The baron of a married family was a trivial thing from the corps commander's point of view, but I think it's understandable that I've grown up, although it is still no excuse. Of course, I'm still reflecting on it now. I was kicked out of my married house. I was born a knight and was chosen to be the son-in-law of a baron's daughter who was of the main family at the time. Well, I was happy. I was happy until she left me after she cheated on me. My wife, well, my ex-wife, was an irreplaceable existence to me at the time. I thought she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and I thought I was the luckiest man in the empire. I thought she felt the same way, and that's why she chose me, but I was wrong. It was my own selfishness. A year later, when my father-in-law died, she left me. I still remember that. Sometimes I have nightmares, but I'll never forget the look on her face and the line she said. Didn't you have a good dream? You were a poor knight, and now you were able to imitate a nobleman. But that's over. I was forced to marry you at your father's behest, and now I'm free too. But it's your fault. Because you won't have offspring. I was so desperate I wanted to scream. I didn't know what she was talking about when she told me, but then I saw the bottle she was holding, like she was trying to show me, and it hit me. She must have drugged me. I could have complained and taken her to court. But the Baron family was an enemy. It's bad enough that my ex-wife had a merchant lover who had money. The Baron's servants had already been bought off. The merchant was an aristocrat. The ex-wife was able to live in the lap of luxury. My father-in-law always told me to be frugal and proud of my aristocratic ways. I guess she didn't like that either. Well, it's a little late for that. At that time, I had no idea that I would ever complain to the main family who took care of me as a close relative. Besides, my parents had died in an accident when I was a kid, so there was no one to argue with. So, well, I had no choice but to leave the baronial family and be driven out. Looking back, that was the impetus. Betrayed by someone I loved and the anger and hatred that drove me on. I was going to move up and show them all off someday. I was young, just in my 20s. I used a resentment as energy and I worked my ass off. I went through deadlines and took great pride in my work. I wasn't afraid to get dirty and I got really good at subterfuge. I got to know some merchants and helped them as much as I could with my authority. I accepted back taxes and turned them over to the nobility to make connections. I worked my way up to the rank of colonel by my mid-20s. I had graduated from night school, so I started out as an adjutant. In other words, I was on track to be promoted within a year or two. That was pretty fast, but it worked because power was everything in the empire. By then, I had taken control of the military and started forming my own faction. That's when I met Minutes. Minutes was an aristocrat, but he was a freak who loved to fight. He was better than me back home, and yet he dared to go to war. But there was no doubt he was capable, so I took advantage of him. I wasn't expecting him to like me or respect me, so I had him ask for money without batting an eye. Minutes was a funny guy, so he took it upon himself to obey orders. Well, he was a guy who probably also took advantage of me, so it was mutual. It was only a consensus of interests, but it was also clear that I trusted him. As long as I was fighting for my career, I'd always be looking for the battlefield. I knew that, if Minutes used me like that, I would follow any order. Because wherever I'd die, I would die with no family, so I was able to do it without fear. And so Minutes and I formed a strange bond of trust. And then Kansas joined in. A man who was known to be a problem for the military, but for me, it was only a matter of time before he was available for use. He passed. And apparently it was the same for Kansas. Kansas liked me because I was willing to go along with any plan. Although he was a devastating force at the time, he had a low reputation in the military. He often violated orders and ran amok on the battlefield. I think he was transferred to me because he was too difficult to deal with, but he was good to me. Not only did I know how to use Minutes, I knew how to use Kansas as well. I was able to plan and execute strategies that ordinary people would have hesitated to do. And by doing so, I gained a position where no one could complain about me. I worked my way up to general by my early 30s. By then, I was out on the front lines less and less. The poisoning I'd gotten as a young man had blinded me in my left eye. That didn't diminish my powers, though. With the newfound power of science at that time, it was easy to make an elaborate prosthetic eye. However, to throw the opponents off guard, I covered my left eye with an eye patch. I thought my powers would fade with age, but I became more and more energetic. I looked like I was suitable for my age, but inside I was bubbling with energy. I was always in my prime, and that's why I wasn't afraid of anything. I was interested in fighting the pecking order, but I preferred to control the military. The general's position was within reach. I thought that would give me more power than becoming an imperial knight of His Majesty. I was adding to my own faction. I used Master Gadra to help bolster the Armored Corps' war effort. I got my merchants to provide money for modernization efforts. I was steadily making preparations and building up my resume, and at the age of just over 30, I was appointed as one of the 3 great generals of the empire. The springtime of my life was just around the corner. So perhaps that's why I was reminded of it during breaks in my work. I wondered what the people who kicked me out were doing. When I had people look into it, I found that I was behind on the ropes for nothing. I didn't have to wonder why, but I had an answer. At the time, I had the power to destroy them. And it was too much. It was well known that they had kicked me out, so my men did what they had to do even though I didn't do anything. They didn't do anything directly. They just quietly talked to their clients about the situation. I wondered if they were still associating with the people who did that to me. That being said, the purveyors would have had no choice but to discover. I was blasting my way up the ladder at a breakneck pace. To begin with, unlike the West, the Empire's economic system did not allow for a free economy. Officially, only the nobility and the military were allowed to do business. The nobles have the right to have their merchants do business on their behalf. These hired traders were hired to do business for them and get paid from the profits. That's why the man who took my wife away from me wanted a position of nobility. He worked for a high lord and allowed his sons and daughters to join him. This way he could legitimately acquire the rights to do business the old-fashioned way. Well, it's a good thing I became a baron, but I guess I made a miscalculation in my rise to power. The man who was laughed at and dismissed was indeed a general. There's a huge budget allocated to the military so they can buy and sell goods. And the generals have the right to let the merchants operate it. Generals are in charge of one of the 3 major legions, as one should know. But this power was even greater than that of the earl. There's no reason to compete with a barony, and business was slowing down as clients were turning their backs on him. I remember feeling hollow when I heard that. I wanted to avenge him myself, but without my knowledge, it was already being accomplished. But I knew that was not the way to go about it. I'd been betrayed once. Showing a sweet response here will draw in more people to come after me. One of the reasons I had risen to the rank of general is that I had no offspring. When you advance in the army, you get a noble title when you leave. The position rises according to the rank. And I don't have children, and I never will. No matter how high they give, it's only for 1 generation. It's no threat to other noblemen. Aristocrats hate it when military men have wealth, just as the military hates it when noblemen have private armies. Gold for the aristocrats, armed forces for the military. This division of labor is what matters. It was taboo for them to interfere in each other's domain. That's why many of the senior military personnel are unmarried. There was also the reason that those who do not have a family can stand on the battlefield, but the struggle for power with the nobility was more important. Thinking about that, it occurred to me. Those who betrayed me were destitute but not destroyed, weren't they? And then I had an epiphany. I still had some work to do. They could live on, because they were noblemen. Although they are low-ranking nobles, they have the status of a baron and can live off of a salary. Then, I must seize that position and destroy it once and for all. And there are others who must be purged as well. That man's father and the count who had his father working for him. If it weren't for these men, I wouldn't be in this misery. I have to destroy my enemies, or I'll get hurt. But if I was to destroy the count, I would have needed to grow stronger. From that moment on, I wanted to aim higher, to gain the power to surpass any person. And then I was just so selfless from then on. It was like I didn't understand, but couldn't see how low and dirty the means of what I was doing was. Well, yeah. You weren't exactly pleasant to watch back then. Then you should have abandoned me. If you had, you would have been the generals. It wasn't my thing. And I didn't hate you. Like Kansas, I just wanted to hang out with guys I liked, good guys or bad, you know. You're a strange guy. I'm aware of that, but I don't want to be told that by you. With that said, the men were laughing at each other. A scrawny soldier in his 40s and a man in a nice suit, Calgurio in minutes. They are talking in the labyrinth at the elf shop, which is reserved for special members only. They are having a private meeting there while enjoying a variety of drinks. The shop was originally only open to a select clientele. They could only enter it on their own or after a background check and payment of the required fee. It wasn't open to 2 people, but since the summit meeting, it had been open to the imperial leadership. It was Rimura's intention to put the war behind them and build a better relationship for the future. Of course, they both understood that. That's why they were taking advantage of him like this without reservation. Well, then, as you know, I took control of the army and planned to take over the world. And then we were defeated by this country, and here we are. Defeated is a mild way of putting it. Not even being a match is a more accurate description. No doubt. I'm happy too. Because I've seen firsthand that there are other unimaginably powerful people in this world besides His Majesty Rudra and Marshal Velgrin Sama. I don't understand the hobby, but I suppose it would have been nice if you were satisfied. So, are you going to make peace with your younger brother? Calgurio asked, and Minute smiled grimly and nodded. I'll have to. He's the marquis that unites the nobility. As long as Masayuki-sama is crowned as the new emperor, it's our job to support him to the best of our ability. Minute was from a marquis family. He joined the army because he wanted to compete on his own resourcefulness alone, and he has risen to his current position. But there is no doubt that at the level of the marquis family, their influence was tremendous and they were heavily favored. Nevertheless, Minute was capable, and no one ever made fun of him. Anyone who did would have seen the foolishness with their own eyes. Minute's family is the current marquis, succeeded by his younger brother. His brother has a lot of resentment towards him for the trouble he's caused. Calgurio was relieved to hear that the 2 sides would reconcile. Well, in my case, reconciliation is out of question. Calgurio thinks that it is better than his own situation. Minute is fortunate in that he is able to use the family's financial resources as he pleases. He's been overlooked because he's good enough to deserve it, but if he's incompetent then the prodigal brother is also a good place. In fact, Calgurio and others don't like that all that much. They heard that he was complaining about his brother being a cheat, but all they could come up with was that anyone would think so. It is probably a man like Minute who is allowed to do that. That's why Calgurio also nails this irresponsible man. Right. It will be a pleasure to work with you, new Prime Minister. Although Minute escaped from his duties as an aristocrat, he was appointed to the position of the Prime Minister, who has the highest authority in the empire. It was under the new system with Masayuki as the emperor. We were in a meeting before, and I said that, for the sake of air, but after thinking it over, it's impossible for me to be an emperor. I've never studied politics or anything like that. No, I learned about it in a high school class, but I only did a little research on the scope of the test for that. Hahaha, you can't take it back now, okay? After all. Of course. I'm getting by myself, so you can do it too. You're too optimistic, Rimuru-san. I'm not joking, don't be so irresponsible. Hahaha, it's okay. Everyone will help you too. Those eyes say that it's definitely someone else's affair, right? I mean, you're looking happy to have more friends. That's not true. Besides, you have a partner that you can rely on. Like that Minute-san over there. I think he's pretty reliable. This was the conversation between Masayuki and Rimuru. Minute was also there and his eyes met with Rimuru's, which was a mistake. It was a probably whim of Rimuru's, but it was not good to stand out in the meeting. It seems that Rimuru was perceived as a capable man and he was appointed as a consultant to Masayuki. And the result was the Prime Minister position. Minute can't help but laugh at that. It was a consultation that he couldn't say that he didn't like as Masayuki had asked him to assist properly. It was partly because of the fear of Velgrin's gaze and partly because Minute had grown to like Masayuki after all. The problem here is the current Prime Minister and Minute thinks that he will be his assistant. Since only the Emperor has the right to appoint the Prime Minister, it would be unreasonable for the current Prime Minister to complain. He might complain, but that was of no concern to Minute. It was enough to say that he knew of a scarier being, so he just needed to convince him first. So, well, there's something to be said for that. He had more than enough education as a nobleman and heir to the Marquis family. Although he wasn't aware of it, his grades were not bad either. He might struggle a bit, but it was Minute's self-assessment that he was good enough to be able to practice. So Minute turns around and asks Calgurio. Don't make me laugh, Minister of Military Affairs. You're the only one left of the 3 major corps leaders, so your responsibility is heavy. Under Emperor Masayuki's new regime, the military was going to be significantly reformed. If Minute becomes the Prime Minister, the current one will be the Deputy Prime Minister. Side by side with him would be the Minister of the Military. The military should be led by a politician, according to Masayuki's superficial knowledge. He put it into words and reflected it in the new system. However, Masayuki only asked, does the minister control the army? He did not mean to suggest that they should do so, and he did not advocate civilian control to more accurately select ministers from the civilian population to control the military. Thus, it was perceived as a misguided system in which ministers of the military were chosen from amongst the military personnel. In other words, Calgurio was to serve as both a military general and minister of the military. Calgurio laughs and replies to Minut's question. You don't need to worry about that. We won't be going to war for a while, and to begin with, as long as I'm at the head of the army, I won't be carrying a sword pointed at a foreign country. It was an honest feeling, mixed with some resignation. In fact, given the geography of the empire, from now on, there would be no neighboring countries where war could be waged. The Jura Tempest Federation and the realm controlled by Demon Lord Milim were out of the question, but the armed nation of Dworgen was also impossible. If they are to have their support, they must build a friendly relationship with them from now on. An invasion of the western nations by airship would be possible, but it was unlikely that Demon Lord Remur would allow it. In other words, there was nowhere to turn. There was still a chance that a great nobleman who controlled the local military could rebel without knowing what to do with himself. We've already sent word to the country. It's about time for the nobles to react, but what's the word from Krishna Dono? So far, nothing significant has happened. Your younger brother's faction has pledged their loyalty to the new emperor. Perhaps that's why the others haven't been able to get around. We're talking about a move, though. But at least I don't think the former sons of His Majesty the Emperor and the families with blood relatives are going to remain silent. Well, since you're going to advertise that His Majesty Rudra has fallen, some will think it's your turn. And for that, we need Velgrin Sama's approval. I would argue that there is no point in saying that the corpse of the Emperor's room is meaningless. The fools will not even realize making that statement is to make an enemy of Velgrin Sama. Calgurio thinks that Minutes is right too. Honestly, they weren't afraid of the aristocrats being hostile. There is no doubt that Calgurio and his men would win, but the problem would be the decline in national power. Emperor Rudra's imposter, or rather Calgurio's real one, since he had been in service with him for so long, was planning to bring chaos to the world with invading races called aggressors. In fact, it is precisely because Calgurio and the others who have opposed the entity that calls itself Cornu that they understand this threat so well. It was a good thing that Velgrind had come, or else they would have been wiped out. The being who was Emperor Rudra wanted to become a god himself. The possibility that the Emperor's subjects would be used as pawns in his quest could not be ruled out. However, no one knew the Emperor's face, so if someone claimed he was Emperor Rudra, they could just stab him in the back. Perhaps the enemy would not do such a thing. This is because the Emperor Rudra, that Calgurio knew, was a hard-hearted man who would not tolerate discussion. We don't have time for quarrels amongst ourselves, though. You're right. Well, I'll be rooting around. Please do. I'll gather the surviving Imperial Knights on my end and reorganize the Imperial Guardians as soon as possible. This will be Calgurio's first job as Minister of Military Affairs, but it would be harder than he expected. After all, he has to start by finding out how many survivors there still are. To begin with, Calgurio doesn't know about the missions of all the Imperial Knights. He doesn't know where they are, so he needs to start by contacting them. Besides, some will even try to leave the army. In fact, Krishna was one of them. He worships Demon Lord Remur like a god and was willing to say that he was retiring and moving to the monster country. Calgurio had asked him to stay until the situation was settled, but he was reluctant to do so. It was a Dalman whom Calgurio consulted for advice, and he said to Krishna, "Never leave a stone unturned. If the empire remains in turmoil, Remuru-sama will be saddened." With that, he convinced him. Hearing this, Krishna said, "As you wish." "You're right, Adalman-sama, what a wonderful speech. I only wanted to be saved. I have to deliver Remuru-sama's compassion to the innocent subjects of the empire too." He was saying something different from what Calliglio thought, but it was good to know that it worked. They say if you care too much, you will lose. That's all for today, hope you guys enjoy it. Please check my other videos. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and hit the notification icon. And don't miss any updates. Thank you for watching.